now. All right. This is the KubeBuilder controller runtime and controller tools meeting for May 7th of 2020. As a reminder, this is being recorded and will be posted and publicly available on the internet. So don't say anything that you don't want recorded in the annals of history. All right, so it looks like we have currently two things on our agenda for today. The first is from Eric, so why don't you take it away, Eric?
Sure. So we recently got the plugins PR merged into master. Thank you, everybody who participated in reviewing that. It was quite a long slog. I think it sounds prudent to have a minor release before we have a major release, including that, so we can get people using it and find any bugs and add follow-ups. So does that sound reasonable?
If we're looking to find bugs in the plugins, we might also want to consider like an alpha or beta release.
Oh yeah.
I know like in the lead up to 0.2, we did a few alphas and a couple of betas, I think, and that seemed to work as well. Do people have thoughts?
I'm okay doing both, whatever is easier.
Yeah, I agree with making some alphas or betas. Otherwise, people might not really even get a chance to see that and experiment with it.
And I think the nice thing about the alpha and the beta too is that because it's like an alpha, there's a little bit of, or a beta, there's a little bit of a call out of, hey, there's this shiny new thing that we really want feedback on, kind of thing. Like the fact that it's a pre-release, which we don't usually do unless we have a big feature, is kind of an indication of like, hey, try this out.
So these would be, an alpha and a beta would be for the major release 3.0, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Do we want to do a minor release beforehand as well, or just skip straight to alpha, beta, or alpha?
Have we accumulated a lot of other fixes besides this?
I think that we have. I mean, removing the V1 project support was pretty big too.
I think that's something. Well, I think removing V1 project support is something we'd also want in V3.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So I think the only reason to do a minor would be if there was like stuff before those two that we wanted to get out in a release. So like if we were to cut a minor, I would say cut it before the two major, or before at the very least before the breaking change, which is removing V1 support.
Yeah.
And then have those last two commits be in the V3 pre-releases. But if we don't have like a ton of stuff that was from before that, I'd say probably just go straight to V3.
I'm okay with that. I think we should look through the issue backlog and see if there's anything that we really want to get in for 3.0. There's nothing in the milestone that's not finished.
Has one, I believe, allocated V3.
Yeah.
One to change the package, which would change this to 3 because it has one user, I believe more than one, that she requested that the controllers in GPI follow the Golang layout, be inside of the package. I can show.
So there's one open issue, you're saying?
Yes. I doesn't know if you folks would like to done that before.
Well, we should definitely take a look at that and make sure that it's either done or moved elsewhere before we actually cut a release. But yeah, I think after going through the issue backlog, we could probably just cut an alpha.
Another thing we might want to do is bump controller runtime in the generated in like the scaffolds.
Yeah, that
still on
seems reasonable.
0.5.
The other thing is since we're doing like alphas at an alpha, like we can continue to like do v3-ish stuff in the alphas and betas if we need to, like if we catch something, but you know.
Okay. Yeah, just wanted to bring that up. I can help or fully do the release. I've never done one for KubeBuilder before, but I'm fine doing
Awesome.
either.
Always good to have more people learn the tooling and the process. Yeah, I can walk you through that. Ping me at some point, and hopefully like the guides in our release documentation are almost sufficient, not sufficient, but we can try to identify gaps and stuff.
Yeah, we'll see if a complete noob like me can figure it out. And if we can, then it's probably good enough.
Okay, cool. It looks like the second one is Alvaro.
Yes, and it might be opening a big can of worms. So the background is that recently I've come again in the situation of building a controller that talks to more than one cluster. This is possible today, but it does require that a manager per cluster that is somehow used in any controller is created. Because the constructor of the controllers, the controller.new, needs to get a manager. And this in turn is needed because the controller needs some things from the manager, like I think the cache, the client, it calls the whole injection logic, and so on. And this in turn means that for such a case of a multi-cluster controller, you end up with a very weird startup, because you need to add the second manager to the main manager, which then means the main manager will start the second manager after it acquired the leader lease. And this means that the cache of the second manager will only be attempted to start it after the main manager got its leader lease, and simultaneously while the main manager starts its controllers, and this whole thing messes up the startup. And so I've been thinking a bit about this problem, and it seems like overall the issue is a bit that the manager, as it is cut today, has basically two responsibilities. The first one is to construct a set of things like caches and the client. Potentially a constructor for this can be passed in, but basically hold it and pass it on to other things that need it. And second, to ensure that we start up things in the correct order. And because the manager also does this first thing, the controller constructor needs to get a manager, even though at that point it doesn't need the manager part that is responsible for starting up things. So my thought was that it would probably make sense to move all this part that creates the clients and the cache and holds them into its own package and interface. Let's call it, I don't know, cached client container for now. I don't have an idea for a better name. And basically use that when constructing a new controller, and this way allow to have a multi-cluster controller without needing to have more than one manager. Does that make sense, and what do people think about that? It was a long and a bit complicated explanation. I'm sorry about that.
I think that does make sense. I think I would need to think about the exact semantics, or like see like a concrete sketch or something. Mainly because like the act of starting the caches is somewhat like fiddly. The order of how the caches are started and how they're added to the controller, I think, is somewhat fiddly, but I think that could work. I think probably we'd still want to keep like have a manager that draws those together for like the fast path, where you're like, or quote unquote probably like the normal path, kind of where you're just in a single cluster, and so you just have a single manager and you don't have to worry about instantiating multiple things. But I think it makes sense I think it could make sense to decompose those two to make like cases like yours more or easier to implement.
Yeah, so the basic idea was definitely to, like, for the normal use case, from a user perspective, keep everything as it is, like change the implementation of the manager probably to use this other thing, but like keep the public API the way it is. Just enable this other case, and that would require that the manager has a specific path to start caches first, for example, and to be able to have more than one cache. Actually, that's the follow-up of that. Yeah, I guess my point right now is mostly that I wanted to hear if the idea as such makes sense. This definitely needs a design document, and that in turn most likely needs a small proof of concept to like figure out what's actually possible. But I wanted to get some feedback if people like the idea as such.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. You're not the only one to bring up the multi-cluster use case too. I think it's something that we've kind of done a lot of, at least I've done a lot of kind of hand waving with on KubeBuilder, and just a lot of people have arrived at some really weird kind of like multiple manager solutions like you have. So I think having a more cohesive story for that would be super awesome, and having something that was less clunky than like gesticulating and being like multiple managers, have managers running managers, good luck.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I definitely would like to review some sort of proposal on this. This sounds like an interesting idea.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I guess that's it for me on this topic.
All right, does anyone else have anything that they'd like to talk about? Before we go, I have one quick thing that we don't need to discuss now, but I was just curious if people had brief thoughts on it. Once we do the initial V3 release, do folks have thoughts on plugins phase 2 and kind of the roadmap for that, or the kind of time roadmap, so to speak, for that?
I don't necessarily have a time roadmap, although I do want to get it done in 2020. That's at the very least the goal I have, probably sooner than later. I have an issue open that opens the discussion for how we want to implement phase 2 that I can link in a hot second.
Okay, cool. That's mostly what I was looking for. Yeah, no super rush or anything, especially with all the stuff that's going on. I was just, yeah, that answer was kind of exactly what I was looking for.
Great.
I think we're probably planning on, like, we as an operator SDK community is planning on like pushing that starting this summer timeframe. So I think we want to get it done in the next, I don't know, 3 to 4 months, but it'll depend on other priorities and whether it's something that we absolutely need for some of our other things. So I think Eric's not wrong, but I think we're going to try to push it sooner rather than later.
All right, cool, awesome, sounds good.
Just quickly before we end, do we definitely want to go ahead with moving API and controller into package? It sounds like there's consensus for this on the issue. Just want to make sure, because I can something up for that.
What's the issue?
Moving in KubeBuilder, moving the scaffolded API and controller directories into the package directory. Kind of like how the current operator SDK scaffolded Go project layout is.
I
just linked it in the chat.
Okay, hold on.
We can also discuss this in the KubeBuilder Slack channel.
Yeah, I mean, we can discuss it here a little bit. If chat will open for me, as opposed to instead of displaying a blank box. If this is what I was thinking, if this is the issue I'm thinking of, actually, can you just say the issue number out loud?
932.
Put the issue in. Okay. There you go. There we go.
I guess we can optionally support adding a package, a root package name like PKG. In V2, we intentionally like dropping this to make we have a simpler layout.
Yeah, I am kind of, I personally really like the package list layout. And one of the reasons that we initially did it was that it was kind of confusing for some folks, like what went in package and what went in command, and like where they should start looking in the new project. Like, and so one of the reasons we have the package and command list structure where we just have API and controllers in the root is because then like the first thing you see is main.go, and like that's a really obvious place to go looking. So I think maybe making it optional would be like okay, but I personally, at least, would be in favor of keeping the package lists
Right.
model. As the default.
I'm pretty indifferent myself. It's a little bit confusing because for me at least, I think of the package directory as a place where you put code that you want to use as a library. A controller is kind of that. The package type, the API types are definitely that. But even then, you're like using them within the same projects, and so it's like library-ish. It's a bit of a gray area, so I don't even think using that reasoning helps here. I think it's more a matter of preference.
Yeah, and like on that subject, like when you go to import the API, like we kind of have a mixed bag in Kubernetes even. Like obviously like Kubernetes has package APIs, and like some of the like all-in-one dependencies like API extensions, API server have package APIs, but then like the actual API package is just kates.io/API. There's no package there, for
Right.
instance. So yeah, I'd be fine with making it up. I think I'd be fine with making it optional, but I'd like to see a little bit more discussion or kind of evidence is probably the wrong term, but like more reasoning as to why to use packaging command by default if we wanted to do that.
All right. Yeah, it sounds good to me. Follow up with some things in the issue. I hesitate to agree with making it optional just because it does increase complexity for almost like no reason in the projects and in KubeBuilder itself. Like it's kind of just moving a bunch of directories around, which you can do yourself in the end and just like make changes to scaffolded files. But for KubeBuilder to support both, maybe it, yeah, adds too much complexity.
That's fair. I mean, the other thing we could do is we could see if we could use that as another kind of like mini test plugin, if that and see if that fits into like the plugins v2 model. Because like hypothetically that could fit into the plugins v2 model, right? Like you get the you get the world set of files and you look for anything that's a Go file and you move it over.
Yeah, that is a good point. That would be fun to.
That's a great idea, actually. I would push for that.
Okay. I'll drop that in a comment in the issue, just so that we have that for posterity.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, that was it.
All right. If nobody has anything else that they'd like to discuss, we can end the meeting now, and I'll see y'all in 2 weeks.
Real quick question.
Oh, sure.
I threw in a chat. Is anybody working on 868?
On what? Say that again.
Issue 868 in controller runtime. It's in the Zoom chat.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. The Zoom chat is giving me issues at the moment. I don't quite know why. So
doesn't look like it.
I saw someone assigned. I wasn't sure if anybody was actively pursuing the issue. I would be happy to give it a look.
Yeah, it doesn't look like the person assigned is still actively working on it. Might just be worth you know, adding a comment saying I'm going to start taking a look at this, but let me know if you're still actively working on it.
Will do.
All right. Does anybody have anything else? Well, if not, then I'll see y'all in 2 weeks.
Sounds good. See you.